I'm very happy to be here again. I was thinking when we came in that it doesn't feel like I'm coming to a foreign country. I feel very much at home here in Korea. And I feel very at home when I see all of you, because I feel that even though we have a different culture, we have a different background, your hair is a little darker than mine, I feel that at a heart level we are very connected, and we all came from the same place in the spiritual realm, and the outer differences don't really matter. Now, what I would like to do here this morning is tell you a little bit about how I found the Ascended Masters and what it meant for me. And I just want to record that. I think we have all grown up in a culture that was very dysfunctional. It was almost schizophrenic. And it's because most of us have grown up in a world where on the one side there was some kind of religion, whether it was Buddhism or Christianity or another religion, that was telling us we were a particular kind of beings. And on the other hand, we have scientific materialism, who tells us that we are a different kind of being. And in my case, of course, the religious side was Christianity, and it was telling me that although I was a spiritual being, I was created by God, I was still a sinner. There was something wrong with me. And on the other hand, we have scientific materialism, which told me I'm just an evolved monkey. And not so long ago, I was just like the other monkeys climbing around in the trees. And when I was a child, I loved climbing trees, but I never believed I was an evolved ape. I never believed I descended from the apes, and I never believed I was a sinner, because I knew in my heart that I was created by God, and there was nothing wrong with what God created. And of course I knew the same about all of you. So when I was growing up, I just knew in my heart, it wasn't something I believed, I knew that there was something missing from both Christianity and materialism. They were not telling me the truth. They were not giving me the full understanding of who I am, what kind of a being I am, and the potential that I have. But of course, I couldn't find an alternative. There was no alternative. Today, it is easier to find an alternative because we have the internet, but I'm so old that when I was born, there was no internet. And there was just nothing else. But I knew that there had to be something to find. And I knew that because as a child, I experienced that there was a spiritual side to life. It wasn't something I believed in, I experienced it. And I think the real difference between people who are spiritual or mystical and those who are religious or those who are not religious is that those of us who are spiritual, we realize that we know something. We know something in our hearts, and it's true. It's real. We may not be able to explain what it is or understand what it is when we're children, but there are certain things that we just know. And when I was a child, I knew there was a spiritual side to life. It was not something I believed. And that sense of knowing has followed me my whole life. And it's why I'm standing here today. It's why I have done what I've done in writing the books and bringing forth the teachings, because I know something. I don't need an expert outside of me to tell me what's real and unreal. I can know that in my own heart. And I'm sure you're here because you also know that there's things that are real. And that is the most important thing for us. I have often wondered how it can be that there are so many people in the world who don't seem to know. You meet so many Christians, for example, who they have faith. They say, I have faith, I believe. But how can it be that they don't know? There is such a difference between being told by a priest, this is how it is, and then you say, oh, I believe what he told me. And then it's a whole different thing when you know from inside yourself, this is real, this is true. And I can only think that it's because they haven't discovered what I had since I was a child. They haven't realized that they can know also in their hearts, but they either haven't discovered it or they don't dare to trust it. And I was always the kind of person who I dared to trust my ability to know. And that doesn't mean that I was all infallible, that my inner knowing was infallible, that what I knew was always the absolute truth. But what I have done is I've always been able to recognize when I heard or found something that was a step up from what I knew now. I still don't claim today, even though I've been on the spiritual path for over 40 years, I still don't claim that I know the highest truth or the absolute truth. Because I know that tomorrow the Ascended Masters, or in 10 minutes, the Ascended Masters might reveal something that I didn't know with my outer mind. So I don't think I have the highest truth, but I do think I have the ability to recognize when a higher truth comes to me. And sometimes it comes from the outside in a book or whatever, sometimes it comes from the inside because I receive an intuitive insight and I just know that's real. And I especially remember when I was a child, I remember it being very important to me to find answers to the questions about life. And I realized that my parents didn't have the answers, my family didn't have the answers, the teachers in school didn't have the answers, but I knew there had to be answers somewhere. And the reason why I knew that was that it simply couldn't be true what Christianity says, that they had all the answers, and it couldn't be true what materialism says, that they had all the answers. And the reason why I knew that couldn't be true was that I could simply see so many things happening in the world that in my heart I knew were not natural, they were not the way things should be. War, for example, I was very, very shocked when I learned about war and understood what it was. It was a complete shock to me that war could be happening on this planet. And the same with many different crimes, the way people treat each other, cruelty towards each other, and torture, and all those kind of things. I just knew in my heart that couldn't be right. And so if Christianity was right that it had all the answers, it should have given us the answer of how to remove war. And if materialism was right that it had all the answers, it should also have been able to tell us how to remove war. And since they couldn't do that, I knew they didn't have all the answers. Another thing that was important to me was that as I got a little older, I was of course thinking about life, but many times my thoughts would be going in a circle because I wasn't finding anything to stimulate my understanding. But I did become more clear on certain things. And I remember that there was some years where I was a newspaper boy, and every day after school I would get some newspapers and I would distribute them in a neighborhood. And it was a very nice sort of higher middle class neighborhood, and I knew that what these people had, you know, the nice houses, the cars, the nice gardens, and the nice life, I could have that too. I could go to school, I could study, and I could have that kind of a life, and I could have a house like that, and I could live in that house for 30, 40 years, as some of these people had done. But I also started realizing that I could not live my life that way. And it's not that I thought it was anything wrong with what these people were doing. It just wasn't enough. There had to be something more to life. There had to be a purpose to life. I needed to have a purpose. I'm not saying that it's wrong to live a normal life out in society. I'm not the kind of spiritual person who says we should withdraw from society and live in a cave or in a monastery. That has never been my philosophy. There's nothing wrong with living in society and living the way people do. It's just that I needed a purpose beyond that. I needed to have something in my life that went beyond just living a good material life. And of course I found none of those things until I was 18 years old and I had moved away from my parents to start university, and I found my first spiritual book. It was called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And when I read that book, I instantly knew that what he was presenting in that book was what I had been looking for. This doesn't mean that I became a student of Paramahansa Yogananda or the organization he had started. It just meant that I knew that the universal aspect of what he was describing was true. And what he was describing was that there was an alternative to both Christianity and materialism. And it was what I would call the spiritual path. It's a more universal spiritual teaching. And the essence of it is simply this: we can systematically raise our consciousness. All of us have the potential to engage in a path that step by step raises our consciousness to a higher level than what we were born with, to a higher level than most people have. And when I read that in the book, I instantly knew that was true. And I also knew that that was part of my purpose in life. And so from that moment on, it was like, you know, I've talked to a lot of people who don't believe in reincarnation. And they can argue for or against reincarnation. But for me, first of all, I've always known reincarnation was true. Ever since I've heard it, of the idea, I knew I had lived before. But I also knew that it's the only thing that can explain why we are so complicated beings. It's also the only thing that can explain how I could instantly know that this spiritual path was real. And it's simply because I had experienced it in past lives. I had walked that path in past lives, and all I needed in this life was to reconnect to it with the outer mind, so I realized, oh yes, that was what I had been looking for. And so I engaged in that path, but you know, Yogananda presents the spiritual path as it has been practiced in India for thousands of years. And the path they have in India is that they have a guru. And so you have a physical guru, a physical person, usually a man in India, and he has an ashram, and he gathers students to him. And so the idea is that by finding this guru who has reached the higher state of consciousness, he can help you raise your consciousness. And even though I knew that that's a valid system, I never felt any desire to go to India, because I knew I was born in the West in this lifetime for a reason. I know I've lived in India in past lifetimes, and that's why I knew it wasn't my job in this lifetime, or it wasn't my plan in this lifetime to go to India and find a guru in India. I know many people from the West who have found the spiritual teaching and who have gone to India, but I never felt that that was my path. But the other thing I realized was that I didn't have any desire to find a personal guru, a physical person who was my guru. And again, I can only explain that with the fact that I have done that in past lives. And there can come a point where you want a different kind of teacher, a different kind of guru. Now, I was involved for a time with a meditation movement that was started by an Indian man who had come to the West and had started this meditation movement. But I never really felt that this Indian man was my guru. I was never attracted to him as a personal guru and didn't have anything to do with him personally, never met him personally. So I started, after some years of having found a spiritual path, I started becoming more conscious of what kind of a spiritual teacher I wanted. And that was when I was then introduced to the idea that instead of finding a spiritual teacher who is in physical embodiment, we have spiritual teachers who are not in a physical body, because they have already been in a physical body and they have ascended. Now, if you take the path that they have taught for thousands of years in India, the essence of the path is that we can raise our consciousness until we reach a higher level of consciousness than most human beings have. But what is the logical conclusion of that path? The logical conclusion to me is that we reach a level of consciousness where we no longer need to re-embody on earth. And therefore we can ascend permanently to the higher realm, and then we become an ascended master. We have ascended, and we have ascended by mastering our own minds. And so when I heard that concept of ascended masters, again, I knew this is real. These beings are real, they do exist. And I also knew that's the kind of spiritual teacher I want. Because I realized that something very, very simple. I realized that when I looked at people in embodiment, there's always a certain self-interest. And we have so many ego games that people are out playing around the world. And I realized that the Ascended Masters are fundamentally different because they have transcended all these ego games. And I'm not saying you can't find a spiritual teacher who has also transcended the ego games. I'm not saying you can't find, there are good spiritual teachers in the world, in embodiment. I just realized that I wanted a different kind of teacher. I wanted one who had already ascended, because what I realized was very simple. An ascended master does not need anything from me. He doesn't need to be worshipped. He doesn't need my energy. He doesn't need my money. He doesn't need my time. The ascended masters are not taking anything from us. They want to give to us. Because once you ascend, it's not a matter of getting. It's not a matter of acquiring. When you ascend, you connect to the source of all energy. You can call it spirit, you can call it God, you can call it source, but you are connected. And you have so much energy flowing through you that how could you possibly need anything from this world? And I instantly saw that was true, and therefore I saw that the Ascended Masters do not want to manipulate me. They don't want to lie to me. They don't want to get me to do anything for them, other than they want me to receive the light, the energy they're giving to me, but they want me to also give it on to the world and to other people. So I instantly understood that as a spiritual student, we can put ourselves sort of in a position where we're in between humanity and the Ascended Masters. Because we have, most people on earth are not awakened to the spiritual side of life. And the Ascended Masters are awakened, but people can't connect to the Ascended Masters, and therefore there's a limit to what the Masters can do through people who are not awakened. So those of us who are aware that the Ascended Masters exist, we can sort of put ourselves in between there, where the Masters can use us to give energy to the world, to give light, and to give, of course, teachings, and thereby we can put ourselves in a position where we can help change the world. And again, you can say it's completely naive to think that one person can change the world or that 80 people can change the world. But how is the world ever going to change if it isn't by people changing it? And how is a change ever going to start if it doesn't start with one person here, one person there, 80 people here? Someone has to start. How has the world improved from the Stone Age to today if it wasn't that some people were open to the idea that things could be done better? Some people were open to the fact that we could grow food on the field instead of hunting the animals. Some people were open that we could create a civilization. Some people were open that we could have a democratic form of government rather than a dictatorship. And again, time and time again, a new trend in the world starts with a few people that are open to something new, to a better way. And I saw when I was quite young that this was my opportunity, because I realized that I had learned about the Ascended Master's existence because I was ready for that. I was ready to be in that position where I could help the Masters bring forth, you know, at that time I was just thinking about giving decrees and invocations and bringing forth light to help change the world. I wasn't thinking about what I'm doing now. But nevertheless, I realized that there was a purpose here. And there was exactly the purpose I had been longing for my whole life. Because when I think back to my childhood, I can see that I knew war was not right. But what can one person do physically to stop war? And suddenly I saw that when you know about Ascended Masters, it's not only a matter of doing physical things, because there are also spiritual things we can do to create change. I'm not saying we don't need to do physical things. Obviously, we need to do physical things to create changes. But I realized that the physical changes are not the beginning of change, because change begins at a higher level and then filters down gradually to the physical level. And the revelation, it was a total revelation for me, because I suddenly realized that I was not powerless. As an individual, I'm not powerless. And I had known that my whole life, that I wasn't powerless. I just didn't know what to do. And suddenly I knew what to do. I knew that I could invoke light. I could invoke spiritual light. And that could help change the world. And for many, many years, I was very happy just invoking spiritual light. And I felt it was very meaningful and very important for me to do that. But then there came a point where I also felt that I had been on the path for so long that I had the potential to step up higher and do a greater service to the Ascended Masters. And that's when I then started the process of doing the Ask the Real Jesus website, and that has led to all of the books. I don't really want to go into that now because I've talked about it before, but the important thing I want to get across here is that I think so many people in today's world are right at that stage where they know in their hearts there's something else. They know in their hearts life must have a purpose. They know there's an alternative to traditional religion and to scientific materialism. And all they need to do is reconnect at the conscious level and realize that it is actually a spiritual, mystical path where you raise your own consciousness to higher and higher levels. And by doing that, your mind becomes an open door for spiritual energy, for spiritual light to flow into this world. And this is what can change the world. I'm not saying that this is all that will change the world, because physical things need to be done. But when you realize the reality that there is a spiritual realm and there are levels of the material universe that are higher than the physical, the masters teach about the emotional, the mental, and the identity levels, then you realize that energy flows that way. Ideas come down from the higher level and they go through the different stages until they manifest in the physical. And so when you look back at world history, you can see that, for example, there was a time when democracy became more accepted or more known. And you can ask yourself, why didn't that happen 500 years earlier? Why did it take until 1776 before America was founded as the first modern democracy? Why didn't it happen earlier? And what I have realized with the Ascended Masters is that before an idea can really break through at the physical level, there has to be an opening in the emotional, mental, and identity realms so that the idea can descend through people's minds and through the collective consciousness. And all of a sudden, when that has been cleared, when the pathway has been cleared, so the energy can come down, then people around the world, all of a sudden, they start waking up, and they don't know why, but all of a sudden it becomes obvious to them that there's something to democracy. I've given the example before that for thousands of years, almost every culture in the world has slaves. It was just considered normal that you owned other people as slaves. And then in the 1900s, all of a sudden it shifted so that most nations suddenly saw, oh, this is not right. We can't own human beings as a piece of property. But again, why didn't that happen 1,000 years ago? Well, it was simply because there wasn't the opening at the higher levels so that people could wake up at the physical level and it suddenly became obvious to them. You can't go back in time and say, here is the exact reason why slavery became outlawed. You can't really give a rational explanation for it, because there is no practical explanation for it. There's nothing better than owning human beings as property and they'll work for you for free. You just need to feed them and keep them alive. You don't need to pay them money. It's what every big corporation in the world would dream about if they could get away with it. But suddenly people started realizing this is not right. And you can't argue why, well, you can come up with arguments that people have rights, but then you can go back 300 years and nobody believed that you have rights. The whole concept that a human being has certain rights, nobody really believed in it. It wasn't obvious to people. So why did it suddenly become obvious? Again, it's because the pathways have been cleared. And how did the pathways become cleared? By more and more people individually raising their consciousness and connecting to the Ascended Masters, who of course know that human beings have rights. Because what I also realized about Ascended Masters is, for them, the individual has supreme importance. We are not just a mass of humanity to the Ascended Masters. The Ascended Masters look at us as individuals because they know that it's only the individual that can raise its consciousness deliberately, consciously. And it's only the individual that can ascend. You ascend as an individual. And to me, that's a very, very beautiful concept. And it's so different from what I was taught when I grew up. And that's why I understand that there are many people who are not ready for it, but I still think there are millions and millions of people in the world who are ready to connect to this idea of a spiritual path and that we have spiritual teachers who are willing to give to us because they have no self-interest. Their interest is not to get anything from us, but to give to us. And really, all we have to do is open ourselves so we are willing to receive. And the masters are always willing to give. But that requires us, of course, to overcome this age-old concept of God that many of us grew up with, about this remote God in the sky who is ready to condemn us to hell if we don't live up to outer conditions. Because when you think about it, the subconscious message that we have all received from that view of God is that this is a conditional God, and that God will only give to us if we live up to certain conditions. And that means following the dictates of an outer religion and its priests. But the reality of the Ascended Masters is that they are ready to give to us at any moment. The Masters don't have any conditions. We are the ones who have conditions, because we can't open our minds and hearts and just receive what the Masters are giving us. And that's the only difficulty that the Masters have, is that we are not open to receiving what they are willing to give. And so, what I would like you to keep in mind during these next few days is that the Masters are here. The Masters are willing to give to you personally. It's only a matter of what you are willing, what you are open to receiving. They have no conditions. So consider for yourself, do I have conditions? Do I think I'm not good enough to receive from the Ascended Masters? Do I think I'm not ready? Do I have any conditions that I think I have to live up to before I can receive something from the Ascended Masters? These 4 days are your opportunity to look at these conditions, to let go of them, and I truly hope for each one of you that you will have sometime during these 4 days this personal experience that I have had so many times, where you know you are connected with an Ascended Master. You are experiencing the presence of an Ascended Master with you personally. It's not just some remote God up there. It's not something that's impersonal. It's that you know that the Ascended Master, there's an Ascended Master who is real and who is here with you, who's willing to work with you, who's willing to give to you, and all you need to do is receive and be open. But sometimes the hardest thing for us can be to receive. But this is an Ascended Master Conference. I'm not important at all for you. What is important for you is the Ascended Masters. I am just the visible messenger. But the really important thing for a conference like this is that you connect in your heart directly to a Master. And you can do it any time, but there's probably no better time than during a dictation. And, you know, there's always, when you're listening to a dictation, there's always two things can easily happen. One is you are very focused on the words because you think you should be hearing the words that are being spoken, but you realize we are recording it, and we will transcribe it, and we will translate it, and you can read it later on the website, and you can read it as many times as you want. So the important thing when you are listening to a live dictation is not really to listen to the words. The important thing is to focus on the presence of the Master who's speaking. especially if you feel that master is close to your heart. Another thing that can happen when you're listening to a dictation is that your mind wanders off and it goes, you're thinking about something, and your mind is somewhere else. Don't feel bad about that happening, it's natural. It's because the masters are releasing light that's flushing things out of your subconscious mind, and you start processing it. But when you become aware that your mind has been away, then again try to focus in your heart on the presence of the master. Because that's what's important, that you have that experience of personal contact with the master. Because once you have experienced it, you just need to experience it one time, and then you can have it again, even when you are alone at home or praying or whatever you're doing. And many times you'll find that if you set aside a little time where you're not studying, you're not reading, you're not giving invocations, but you are focusing on the presence of the master, then you can recreate that experience of, you know the master is there with you. And that is what is really important. I hope for you that you will all have that experience during these next 4 days, because for me, you know, I started out saying I would explain why the Ascended Masters are important to me, and it was important for me to find teachers that are beyond the human idiosyncrasies. But the real reason why I'm standing here is that the Masters are so real to me, and they are so beautiful. I mean, the presence of a master is beautiful beyond anything on earth. And once you experience that beauty and that love that's coming from the masters, there is just nothing in the world that compares to it. And I wish all of you could have that experience and carry it with you for the rest of your lives, because it is very, very precious. It's like Jesus said, the pearl of great price, where you are willing to sell everything to buy that pearl. It doesn't mean you go out and sell everything you have, but it means that you realize that there's nothing in this world that is as important as that experience of a real ascended being who is so beyond anything in this world. So I wish for you that you can have that experience, and I want you, again, don't focus on me. You're not going to have it. I can't give you that experience. It's only the masters that can give it to you, and they can only give it to you in your own heart. But again, the only condition is to be open. That is also the most difficult challenge, is to be open and to receive. But I hope I can inspire you to focus on that, focus on the masters, focus on that experience in your hearts. So thank you very much for now, and we will give an invocation and have a meditation.